Are you stuck in your chaotic modern world? Living your day-to-day life without the power of awareness and self-control? Truly, a joyful and meaningful life cannot be achieved when you are on autopilot. I understand, and we can help you get in control again and help you experience tangible freedom by guiding you to a Live Awakened life. This is Jose Reynoso, and you're listening to the Live Awakened podcast, where we nurture your mind, body, and spirit, helping you evolve and transform to your best version, from your inner being to your outer physical form. Live Awakened podcast is here to promote and develop happy, productive, and successful humans here in the present moment. May the force be with you. Welcome to Urban Awakening. Today's episode, I have Bianca, my partner, next to me, which will be co-hosting this episode, and we have Jeffrey Wium, which you're now in Bali, and welcome to the episode.
Oh, thanks so much for having me again.
So what are you doing in Bali now?
I'm resting, actually, in between retreats from Europe on my way to South America, and taking some time to be here and just take it easy, basically.
Oh, amazing. You were hosting a retreat or a few retreats in the UK, that's right?
In the UK and in Europe, yeah. And then I've moved over to the Pacific Rim mainly, just because I'm being drawn to New Zealand and also to Bali these days, having invitations from the Maori elders and the Indonesian priests, and starting to work very deeply with them and start to add their body of wisdom to the living library that I'm creating. That we already have the Andean wisdom, and we recorded the Mayan wisdom in early January when we were down in Guatemala.
Oh, wow. Beautiful. So why do you think it's so important now to be bringing back this knowledge from like the Maori or the Indonesian elders or ancient civilization, and what do you think us as Westerners benefit, for example, in this latest retreat in the UK from the teachings that you're bridging, because you're traveling physically, but you're also bridging the spiritual knowledge, I guess?
Yeah, it's a good question. Right now, humanity is in a place where we're realizing that we haven't had adequate upbringing for spiritual intelligence. The West tends to address the physical aspect of education, but doesn't tend to address the spiritual aspect of education, which is more about the living presence and dealing with your space within the cosmos. So the ancient ways and the traditional ways, the Aboriginal ways, they all operate in complete animistic harmony as a collective, as opposed to an individuated form that's in a state of separation, even subconsciously. So I'm finding that it's really important now, because people have been taking so many classes and programs, but what I hear from people all over is that they haven't had a profound or a big enough effect on their daily lives. Mm-hmm. And so they're saying, I understand this, but I don't know how to apply it. And one of the things that happens is that we're taking in information through what I'll call the processor, how we look and digest information, and we're trying to make change. The problem is that the processor is based on a mental construct, and it's inadequate to do so. So we're in a stage where we need to revitalize ourselves, in my opinion, and in that of the elders, and learn how to work in what we're calling a spiritual intelligence or a heart intelligence, in order to remake our perspective so that we can operate and fill in the gaps that have been caused by modern culture.
Because I guess we've been trying very hard to fill in those gaps with external things, right? Like another addictions or patterns or whatnot. Would you say that now more than ever, we're in a I think like in a point where instead of knowing so much, as you said, like intellectually or whatever, we need to experience more and do that connection? Because everybody has read many spiritual books or they've watched movies or documentaries, but I think the work you're doing is providing an experience for people to really feel in every cell, in every bit of their body, what it means, all those teachings they've been reading or listening to.
Yeah, we have a natural evolution of our consciousness. So back, 2,500 years ago when Buddha was teaching, he was talking about mindfulness because we had a very erratic, chaotic, not very ordered uh, consciousness, you might say. And so mindfulness was a way to use the mind to observe what's happening, and it became a foundational tool. But right now, I feel, and I was speaking with a Sufi master, a friend of mine named Kabir Helminski, and he was talking about how we're moving towards heartfulness, and that's a completely different set of tools, you might say, based on gratitude, based on awakening, based on various things that helps us to live in the presence as opposed to interpreting using our processor, using our mind, using the analysis, using really a limited tool. Not to poo-poo it, as we say in Hawaii, or not to put it down, but to recognize that, like many things in the West, it hasn't become illuminated so that it understands its complete space and function in the totality that is. So an example of that might be in the Andes, we have what's called munai, which is love.
Muna.
And then we have tukai munai, which is the embodiment of love. And then we have tukai munai niyok, which is he or she who embodies excuse me, and understands not just the unconditionality of it, but how it works in all the dimensional realities and all of the horizontal interactions that we have. So it's more of a mastery as opposed to a conscious competence, if you will. So what I'm finding now is we're in a place where we have read lots of books, we've gone to lots of programs, we've done retreats, we've sat at the foot of a yogi or a sadhu or a sage or a mystic. But what I find is that it's a time where we have to bring our wisdom from within. And that's being complemented these days by a lot of the indigenous elders that I sit with who are saying, wherever it is that you are in the world, find your own indigenous ceremonies and wisdom and bring that forth from your land so that you're not adopting and then trying to find a translation point to bring that back into your culture, because the dress, all of the functionality of it is specific to a certain culture, if that makes sense to you. So it's really like finding the love within or the light within and bringing it forth. So what we try to do in our retreats and our facilitation is simply hold space and provide a container and the tools so that everyone can rise. Because really, at the end of the day, we're just all walking each other home. There's no hierarchy of who's better than another person. We just have different experience. And so as we come together in a circle or in a council way, we're able to sit as different instruments in a larger symphony, and somebody sets the bass line, somebody sets the drum narrative, so to speak, to use the analogy, and then everybody brings in their harmonics so that there's a greater rise in humanity. And I find it's very important these days because just to impart knowledge isn't enough. Just to, I was teaching the other day to a yoga teacher training here in Bali, and they just finished a 3-week course. And what came through was the tools of someone to teach yoga, the asanas and the routines, is simply the technicality or the tool belt that you wear. But the real yoga, one who is yoked to God, is how do you hold space and do the bhakti yoga, that pray to creation within and around, so that you're holding adequate space to invite others there, and then using the tool sets, the asanas or whatever it is, the shamanic practices, to help them to become unblocked and to find their own divinity. And it's really a matter of humanity rising, or as we could call it, ironically, the ascension from the head to the heart.
Wow.
Yeah.
We were actually listening to Drumbalo Melchizedek, a chat he gave at the Conscious Life Expo, and he's saying like that right now he's focusing a lot in that ascension from the mind or the brain to the heart. And I think we're listening to many knowledgeable people and teachers talking that it's the moment to work down here, that this has been worked too much. And I really like how you describe yoga and how you took into the or how you supplemented the yoga teacher training with the part of like, okay, that's the asana is the physical, is like the movement, but now you have to connect to the bhakti devotional.
It's one of the things that happens in the West is that we, again, it's what I'm calling the processor. We have been trained to take in information, record information, disseminate information, and regurgitate information, but we really haven't been taught how to think. And that's one of the fallacies of the education system worldwide in the West now, is that we don't have a lot of thinkers, which is ironic. We have a lot of regurgitation. We have a lot of homogenization, that this is the way it is, this is the way it should be, you should fit in, as opposed to the free-spirited expression that, say, Steve Jobs proffered by saying, think different. And in order to think different, we actually have to go in and take out the limitations and put in something new. So if you look at Albert Einstein, he's saying the definition of insanity is trying to get a different result by doing the same thing. So if I'm to meditate every day or do yoga or do fire ceremony and do it exactly the same way, but there's a separation between myself and the connection, I'm going to get the same empty result over and over and over again. If I go and I get initiations, if I go and do programs, but I don't have somebody hold space and be the example or show or facilitate how to make the connection animistically with the consciousness that moves through all things, then at best I'm able to provide a technically proficient example, but not an energetically proficient example of what living embodiment is. Do you understand? So we basically have come to a place where we have built the car, it's perfect, but there's no gasoline in it. There isn't the plug-in, or to use the analogy of an electric car, we have the plug, but we don't know where to plug it in. And the heart is where we plug it in. But we've been plugging it into the head, and the head is creating this loop, which actually is a karmic loop that is repeating the same thing over and over again, which is the definition of insanity. And the prophecies of the indigenous races say, at this time, humanity will exhibit a great deal of what it appears to be insanity, which is because we're trying to regenerate ourselves by doing the same thing over and over again. And it's frustrating. And again, if you look at Einstein, he's saying, you can't find the solution at the same level that the problem was created in. So even colleagues of mine are trying to address and overcome wounds, overcome deficiencies, overcome traumatic response. But they're trying to use their mind to analyze it, create a new functionality, and they find up they're in the exact same place over and over. It's a vicious cycle. So the heart is something, as Drumvalo is saying, to create a virtuous cycle is to come into a space where our heart is guiding us. And in order to do that, there's a great surrender that has to happen. There's great courage, there's great faith, there's great trust. There's a great stepping into the unknown, which is going to trigger the fight, flight, or freeze mechanism back in the limbic brain that's trying to keep us safe. And it's going to say, what are you doing? You don't know, you don't want to go there. We have trained ourselves to be assured that if we jump from one place to another, there's solid ground. But if you look at the shamanic principles, they say the job of the shaman is to lift one out of their comfort zone, dangle them over the abyss, and then set them down on solid ground that they don't even know is there. And that's a very, very intensive process, because it means we're going into that space of finding our wings after we make the leap. And we are not trained to do that in our culture. Indigenous culture is very trained to do that. And that's where the indigenous culture fits so perfectly in the state. And the very reason why we're creating the Living Library of Indigenous Wisdom and facilitating spaces so people can be held and see maestros that embody or are on the path of embodiment of that as working, living examples of that. So it's a living prayer as opposed to just an empty ritual.
Beautiful.
A shamanic friend of mine said this summer to me, he asked his grandmother long ago, what's the difference between a ceremony and a ritual? And she said, oh, that's very simple. A ceremony is a life practice that is engaged animistically and plugged in. A ritual is when you've lost the connection, you're going through the motions.
Oh, wow. Well, that's a very good question.
It really struck me. And I just said, And so a lot of people want to do rituals, but I say, let's do a living ceremony. Let's remember how to be a living prayer so that we don't have to go out and do anything, but the act of brushing your teeth is high ceremony because you're cleaning your teeth and you're in the presence and aware of all the realms at the same time. And I find that's the embodiment that we're missing in the West.
I'm wondering if you're willing to share a concrete tool that our listeners can maybe use to start that journey from their head to their heart, like maybe one of your favorite or something powerful that we can use right away and implement.
I would say the first thing is to not rely on what you think, but start to feel what your response is, the authentic feeling. Because one of the interesting things and the catches or traps of feeling is, like I say, well, that's how I feel, is feelings are generated by biochemical responses in our brains, which become feelings. So we have to be able to discern between what is an authentic feeling that's coming from the heart, where you have an inspiration that says, oh, I'm inspired to do that. Or that same feeling may be inspiring you to say, I can't do this any longer. So simply bypassing the Velcro of the mind that wants to stick and listen to the limbic brain, to wait, count to 10 kind of thing and say, okay, now what do I think about it, or what do I feel about it now? To start to become aware of what is the response that comes from protection and separation, competition, ego, arrogance, even narcissism, that is driving us to compete with others, to judge, to blame. And I'm not immune to any of this. I deal with it every day. I'm just on my journey. But to become aware that there's more than just this processor. So the easy way to say it is don't believe everything you think. To really start to question and to sit, and before making a decision or even answering an email, start to really ask, what is the highest I can do? What can I do that supports the person in front of me the best? Because that alone is going to take you out of an individuated response into a collective response. If you look at the Iroquois nation, they say, make your decisions based on what's good for the next 7 generations. So for us, if I can make my decisions based on what's best for you two, because I'm sitting in front of you now, then by that very win-win situation, I'm going to be fulfilled. So that as what's called Iya in the Andi, or unmanifested pure energy, descends through the intention, through the attention, through the prayer, if you will, it comes through the back of my heart, is where we receive love. It exits out of the front of the heart, and it journeys into the space in front of me. But by their very nature, I'm filled by that manifestation, as opposed to draining all my energy, which is something very common these days, something that we suffer from greatly. So that's one thing that's very effective, just the patience and the courage to say, where am I operating from, and what is my intention? What is the goal? Am I trying to protect myself? Am I trying to assure myself of sufficiency? Am I operating out of scarcity? How can I be abundant so that my prayers come fully and manifest for all of humanity? Because we're all walking each other home right now. No one's being left behind. And if we're all just driving around trying to get in the parking spot, there's no gifts coming from any other place to me. So if I allow someone else to have that parking spot, so to speak, then there's a larger place of residence, a spiritual parking lot, you might say, that becomes available for me, because spirit that is moving through all things is constantly feeding at the right time. And to sit back and to sit in the unknown and to accept the invitation instead of constantly making the decisions based on not wanting to get hurt. So we have a very deep psychology that is operating from a place of not wanting to get hurt, to not want to re-experience the pain. But if we don't allow ourselves to go into the unknown, if we don't allow ourselves to experience something that we've never experienced before, be loved, for example, we're continuing the vicious cycle and never allowing ourselves to move into these places because we're afraid of what could happen. And what I observe is a lot of humanity spends most of their time protecting themselves from that which has not even happened yet, and preventing themselves from ecstasy, from intimacy, from abundance, from joy, because we've been trained and programmed to operate very differently. This is that processor I'm talking about.
Yeah, I totally agree with this last statement. Like, I think we're the only animals in the planet that suffers before an event happens and then suffers after the event happens. I think an animal, within 3 hours of their shock, they forget about it and they continue their life. We are expecting an accident to happen, so we get a life insurance, and then when that happens, we recall those events, so we make that painful event eternal because we live in that pain image, I guess.
Yeah, I find that we actually manifest our prophecy. So if I'm going to need life insurance, or health insurance, I'm going to create a situation where I need to use it.
Yeah.
But if I reside in life assurance and health assurance, then I'm not magnetically attracting the car accident, the heartache, the whatever it is, because I'm choosing to sit in an abundance of love that allows for myself to be fed and all others to be fed. And if I have a negative thought or a vision, then I may use that as a way to pull off the road so that I avoid what potentially could happen. But we create our reality, and there's just a huge deficiency in our education system of this, what we're calling spiritual intelligence. And so one of the great questions that we pose is, how do we raise a spiritually intelligent being in this day and age in a culture that is completely void of that construct? And it's a very profound question that the elders talk about, because we are talking about an overturning or a panchakuti and a regeneration down to the basic structure of how we function as a society. And thankfully, that's all going on right now. The thing that's hard right now is we're just seeing the disassembly and the deconstruction of all the control grids and all of the things that have kept us from the very things we're talking about.
Will you say that 2019, we're seeing lots of those structures come down even faster than before? I'm feeling that.
Yeah.
I know I've been chatting with people in our retreats. We're feeling like even like family members that they don't consider themselves spiritual. They're like, I'm starting to see things as they are. And it's crazy, I don't know.
Yeah, it's called the quickening. So this year is even more intense than last year, and next year and next year and next year. But it's not something where we have to say, oh God, I can't keep up. The very act of awakening for me is that if my awareness is such that it is on 50% of the time, it might be a stretch to deal with it all the time. Next year, it might be 65, 75, 85. As we move into awareness, it just becomes normalcy. In fact, the process of awakening, it becomes more and more normal all the time, which is ironic because we expect it to be this, this blissful state. It is, but you also feel very deeply everything else that's going on. So yeah, very much we're continuing to unfold at great speeds.
I want to ask, I guess it's much easier said than done to, trust and go into that unknown. And we're always saying, like, you just have to trust, and, with the unknown will give abundance, but you have to take that leap of faith. Are there any other words of wisdom that you could provide to really giving that inspiration, that encouragement to be trusting of, that the path will open itself as soon as you take that leap of faith?
One of the ways I explain it is you have to make room at your dinner table for a new guest to arrive. You have to make space in your life for new ways of operating to arrive. You have to weed the garden so that there's space for new thinking. So that's going to challenge us to go into a space where we really have to identify what are the things that are holding us back, and how much do we give away our power to our friends, our family, to our culture, that keep us in a limited construct. There's a book by Richard Bach called Jonathan Livingston Seagull, and it talks about a seagull that is basically supposed to follow a fishing boat around and just live from the scraps, but he never gets to explore the flying and the aerodynamics of flight, and everybody ridicules him. So the courage it takes to go out and fly and do your thing, eventually to come back and to show everyone else the possibilities, is tremendous. And it's a very deep conversation and journey between you and the Creator. And it's a very deep path that the place of the maestro, the Paco, the saint, the mystic, the embodied one, is one to hold that very essence and stand alongside and say, this is how I do it. Now you find your way to do it. So it's hard to find words of wisdom, as you've asked, to convey how to do it. There's such an incredible determination. There's such an incredible leap of faith. There's such a importance of having community, friends that think alike. You know, sometimes I show up at retreats and I look around the room and there just isn't adequate space in the garden to plant some of these seeds. When I first was asked by the Andean lineage to go to the west or to the north and teach these things, I was very excited. And when I arrived, I realized, gosh, I'm gonna have to spend about a year weeding the garden. So there's a lot of letting go that has to happen. There has to be a lot. And then when we let go, there's that, and so there's that kind of make a fist, let go, make a fist, let go. As Buddha said, fall down 7 times, get up 8. There's going to be a lot of challenges on the path. There's going to be situations where you're no longer able to hang out with a person because they are stuck in duality and pulling you down. And so one of my elders said, just bow to what appears to be asleep around you and attend to the silence. You know, there's 7.5 billion different ways to do it. You know, in the time of the teacher, the time of the guru, there was very few ways, very few individuals that found a way through the darkness to touch the light. And so in transcendental meditation, TM, the initiation, everybody does the same puja. Everybody does the exact same thing because that's the way to do it. Right now, since 2012, you can wake up doing anything. And the biggest and the most ironic thing is that the act of waking up in your discomfort and your disease is the very divine communication that's saying this isn't working. So instead of trying to push it away, suppress it, or move away from it, my invitation is, how do we move deep into that compost, or in the Andes we call it caca, which is a word for ego in Quechua, and we use that stinky, entangled, difficult part of ourselves, and we compost it and we grow our new life out of that, because the energy of our life, the actual soul loss that leads to depression, that leads to chronic fatigue, is contained in those places that we're not attending to, that we've pushed away or shoved down or ignored, or anything where we're not embracing that which is our life. It's very ironic in the Western world where we come into an incarnation and we decide for the first 28 years, the 4 7-year cycles, the various things that our soul needs friction against in order for the soul to evolve. And nothing in our Western construct prepares us or teaches us how to be a master gardener, how to turn that lead into gold. And that's really what the indigenous, going back to the first question, that's what the indigenous cultures bring and offer us so beautifully at this time, is the tools, the techniques, the example, the living prayer. So that our lives aren't just at the fire ceremony. They're just not at the retreat. They're not just when we're sitting and meditating or doing yoga. We're actually off the mat, to use a yoga term, and we're walking that awareness into everything we do, recognizing that the friction we need to start that soul fire is available everywhere. And these days it's just abundant. You know, there's so much opportunity to go beyond judgment, to go beyond blame, to go beyond separation, and to really embrace and bow and allow each person to have their own unfolding while you sit and attend to that vertical relationship which has been lost, or the lack of communication with the starlight, as the as the Pacos say. We get very caught in the horizontal picture. We don't trust. We depend. We become codependent, and we're cut off from Mother Earth and Father Sky. And so it's turning that frozen aspect like this and becoming in communication like that, and then allowing our knowing not to be stuck here, but to drop down into here and guide us from that innate feeling, from that inspiration, from that intuition, that this goes against everything that my mind is telling me, my culture is telling me, my friends are telling me, but I'm just going to take that leap of faith. That's that book, Jonathan Livingston Seagull. That's the condor in Colca Canyon that jumps off the cliff and then spreads its wings once it hits terminal velocity, knowing that the wind is there to rise it up to 5,000 meters. It's such a deep trust in the unseen. And then in the process of that trust, the unseen becomes seen. The temporal temper tantrum that we live in gives way to the eternal essence that's holding all of it, like a grandmother is holding a crying baby. This is the crying baby. This is the internal grandfather, the grandmother.
And I guess we tend to lack this trust because we, in this first 28 years or whatever, we never had a rite of passage or a coming out of age or the guidance of the master, of the guru or whatever, as an aiding or as a helping hand to guide us and to start creating our own trust in our own guru and our own mastery, I guess. And because I know, like, there's traditions that they do 4 days, 4 nights without food and without water, which if you tell any Westerner, they will say you're gonna die, basically. But I think that's part of creating that trust, you know, as the condor diving into the cliff and learning that you're gonna take off, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We have lost our rites of initiation to such a degree that there isn't any cord cutting or differentiation that happens that allows us to step fully into a human life. There isn't any indoctrination. There isn't any ownership or initiation process to come into our sexuality, to come into the formation of our mind at 21 years old, to come into this lifetime and own fully our gender, you know. And when you talk to the lost tribes in the Amazon, they specifically talk about the importance of these steps and ceremonies to help guide a young individual into spiritual intelligence. And so that goes back to that, how do we then create adequate spiritual intelligence in the North where all of these mechanisms have ceased to exist? So that is the overturning. That is, for me, the rewriting, the reintroduction of this, the overturning of the education system, the capitalist system. We're talking about everything. The end of times, where everything turns over and becomes anew, but it comes out of itself. The Panchakuti is the crumbling of the old structure and then the growth that comes out. In the same way, each spring, new growth comes out of the old growth. If you look at a plant and it dies back in winter, the new growth comes out of that old growth. It's not to shame or to blame or to judge or to get trapped in protest about what has been, but to simply find the courage to say, I take this and I move through this into my verticality, into my responsibility as a human to embody and become maybe that which has never been seen before. But that means we have to overcome our fears. We have to bypass this thing that's telling us everything. It's a very, very explicit programming that we operate from. A lot of death. People hate death. People hate the idea of death. People don't know what death is.
Well, in Bali, where you are now, they celebrate death almost. They do, the whole town goes into a parade.
Absolutely. I was just here last month when they did that. And, you know, and then the very next day, the entire island shuts down. They shut the airport. They shut the port. They turn off the internet. And they turn off the lights and everybody sits.
What's the name of that? The black.
What's it called, that name? It's
Nipi.
Nipi.
It's the day, Nipi, yeah. But the night before, on the 6th, they all create these incredibly demonic creatures and they go out and fight and then they burn them. And it's just a free-for-all. It's an honoring. And then that quiet day afterward is to give the spirit realms adequate space to find balance, you know, and there's all the demonic and all the dark side is simply carrying out their job in duality. You know, they're not negative, they're not bad. They just have a job, and it happens to be disruption. It happens to be isolation, pain and suffering. But in Guatemala, when you go in and do underworld ceremonies, you go in and you sit with everything dark and everything light, and everybody is kind of sitting around, you know, and saying, and you have negotiations. You don't look at it like, oh, these are the bad guys and good guys. It's just like, okay, if I need to wake up, then I might need a smack in the head. If I can't do it consciously, I'll need an ally of consciousness to help me along with that process. And what better way to realize you need to pay attention to your health than becoming sick? Otherwise, we just keep going. You know, how do we need to look at the way we're loving ourselves? Well, how about some heartache? How about somebody saying, you know what, you're just not paying attention. You're not this, you're not that. And it's very hard for me to deal with this. So I'm going to break up with you. That's a very huge motivational tool to come to self-love. But we're not trained to look that way. We're trained to say, they're so-and-so and blame them, and then go out and try to find somebody else, only to repeat the same pattern over and over and over again. But the commonality, the common denominator is ourselves. So in Hawaii, we call it ho'oponopono. How do we take responsibility for the perspective we hold?
Beautiful. So since you mentioned a little bit about the Andean, let's say predictions or stories, could you tell us from their perspective, where do we come from? Where was our origin, if there was ever a beginning, or where are our ancestors before they manifested here on Earth?
Well, I'll tell you a little story. I went on a journey not too long ago with Ashwar Incan, who was facilitating a ceremony, and I was sitting right next to him, and I said, okay, Great Spirit, I want to go find my origin point, just what you're asking. So I went in, and I went into this fantastical space where there was this black Buddha and all of these fuchsia-colored streamers coming out of energetically, and I was like, wow. And then I looked over to the side, and there was this kind of condor angel eagle thing sitting over there, quite large, much larger than I was. So I walked over, and it kind of motioned to him, and I jumped onto its back, and we soared off out into the dimensional realms. And so I was using my techniques I know, and I was going, it was kind of like, you know, on Star Trek or Star Wars, where they go into warp speed and all the stars go, we were going for quite a ways, and I said, we're going through dimensional realms and going through portals. And then finally it just kind of went out into space and all around. And I said, I must be here. I must be at the origin point. And all of a sudden this booming consciousness there said, oh, silly, you're from everywhere. And I just, where aren't you from? And I just kind of laughed and cried at the same time and shook my head and just like, of course, how silly of me to think I'm from a place. We're consciousness embodied. We're everything. Where do we not exist? You know, and I took that ride back to my body, sitting there in that ceremony in that forest, and opened my eyes and realized that all of that was right here around me all the time. And it was very much of heaven coming to earth, which is part of the times we're in. We're not going anywhere. A lot of people are trying to escape. A lot of people are doing all this new age up there without the groundedness. All of that is coming here. The thing that's been hard for us is we've been quarantined and blocked from that. Our DNA has been blocked and dumbed down. There's so many things.
Question on that. We can talk about. Who blocked our DNA, or what's the force behind this?
We did. Who didn't do it? Right? Every time that I go into a room and I look at somebody and I judge them, or if I go blame somebody, or that's me blocking myself. That's me dumbing myself down. That's me unconsciously choosing to live in separation. You know, the only reason why we're in separation and in duality is because we're collectively choosing to live here. Union and holiness and divinity is here all the time. It's just unseen and internal. And because science doesn't tell me a formula that proves it, I don't believe it's true. And because I don't believe it's true, it's not my reality. And people will say, you're crazy or you're out of your mind. And I say, yeah, we should be out of our mind.
Yeah.
We should be in our heart, because, it's like Galileo saying that we revolve around the sun, and they thought he was nuts and put him in jail because it went against the construct of a control apparatus that said, no, we are the center of the universe. I watched my sons go from the mentality that they're the center of the universe to recognizing their place in the collective, in community, in the family. We just haven't awoken as a species to the point where the 100th monkey effect takes place, where we all go, it's us. We're the ones we've been waiting for. The elders are like, you're the ones we're waiting for, because you're the ones that are making this jump right now. You're the ones that are making the leap of faith and finding your wings on the way down. Bravo. And if you look behind us, all the ancestors are applauding, saying, we've been waiting now for you. Go. And we're like, I don't know. I don't have an instruction manual. I don't know how to do this. I want to blame somebody. And that's the catch. As long as we want to blame some politician, or we want to blame our parents for doing the best they could, if we want to blame our boyfriend, our girlfriend, our husband, our wife, whatever. Okay. That's called suffering. That creates a dharmic wheel. That creates a lot of pain and suffering. And so it's up to each of us, going back to your question of, how do we do this? We have to step out of the stream of unconscious autopilot and recognize that, wow, I'm not even thinking. I'm just, because that's what everybody else is doing. Not in judgment of that, because that's a very important stage of manifestation. Unconscious incompetence is the base through which we recognize our incompetence and then choose to become conscious. And then when we do that long enough, it becomes unconscious competence, where it's mastery. We don't think anymore because we're busy dealing with other realms of ourselves. I think last time we spoke, we talked about the 60 or 70 aspects of a human being that has to awaken to fully become illuminated. That's a lot of things to spend time focusing on. And so there's all the things that are coming up, but there's also all this other stuff that's still down in the kaka stage that needs to rise. So what I find and what I encourage is, how do we become the master gardener and go down into the womb, in the place of pain, and bring that fertility up to the heart, and bring that intuitive intelligence and that experiential intelligence down, and feed the heart and develop that spiritual intelligence. And just take that well-developed processor that's on the left analytical lobe and set it on the side, and when you need to do taxes, plug it in. But otherwise, just bypass it and really start to develop a heart wisdom.
And I guess that's when magic starts manifesting, because it's always been there, but you've been focused in your taxes or whatever else all the time, right? So based on right now you were saying how to go back into the womb, or how to go back to our center. What do the Maori or Indonesian ancient philosophies say, or traditions?
Well, I would say it's global. I say if you go back far enough, it's all one body of wisdom that has been splintered into different books in different lands. But we all come from the stars. We all come and return to the stars. We have separated ourselves from our internal wisdom. We've become top heavy. We need to celebrate the heart, or the essence of the earth, the heart of water, the heart of the land, the heart of each other, the loving presence. Return to the heart of love is an elder Maori brother of mine, sings this song quite often. And he's constantly saying, how do we just return to love? The Sufi sheikh of a friend of mine, I asked him a year or so ago, I said, how'd you get there? And he said, I went through basically every tradition you could find. and each one wound up in love. And then when I discovered the Sufi tradition, they're the masters of love, although a great deal of that body of wisdom has been lost. So it's about love, because love is what fuels the universe. And if we can have the courage and make the choice to love everything until there's nothing left unloved, we will be a very different species. One choice at a time, one heart at a time. Right now I'm in a place, if I can talk about my life for a second, I just realized that I have been operated from a place realizing that there was something to fix. I left a society growing up in the United States that didn't support me. I formed a judgment against it, to move away from it, to go find something, to bring it back to the West, to try to fix something that I thought was broken. And just this last week, I went through this profound emotional state where I realized my motivation comes from separation. Very subtly, but very profoundly, thinking that something needs to change instead of just bowing to the unfolding of God, of Creator, in everything, and not giving it the energy that makes it stronger, but simply choosing just to love again and again. And what's interesting, to the Western mind, that sounds very naive. That sounds very stupid. It sounds like nothing's going to happen. But what I'm realizing is that all of the things that don't work are going to take care of themselves. The way the synaptic reality works is that the more you focus on this thing and the less you focus on this thing, this pathway breaks down and dissolves, and this one strengthens. So if I choose fear, I choose loathing, I choose fighting cancer, fighting the drug war, fighting president, fighting whatever, I'm making it so much stronger. And I'm suffering. But if I just choose love, this thing ceases to exist because no one's choosing it. And if you can be the example in your family and be the example in your community and an example in your region, you can be the example on a planet along with the other billions, then the entire population moves that way. And then we start to take our place again as galactic humans outside of the quarantine. It's not a easy process. It's not a quick process. But it's going to be a quantum leap once enough of these monkey minds stop driving the bus, in my opinion. But I don't know anything, so,
Thank you for sharing your own process in the past week. That's a very deep insight, and it's super good to get it recorded so fresh. Let's say that next time we chat, I guess. Well,
to add to that, the funny thing is I've been sitting here for the last few days like, what do I do now? Well, what do I do now? I don't need to do anything, but I have to. And it's just kind of watching that thing come off of it. It's like the door has come off the hinge, and it's just kind of like flapping in the wind. Like, but what do you do? How do I teach? Well, you don't need to teach. There's no need for a teacher. Okay, then what do I do? And it's comical. It's like I'm watching it. It's actually a horror film, actually. It's a comedy and a horror film. Because I realized how long that motivational axis has been playing out, even under the guise of being an Ultima Messiah and being a lineage holder and given the task of coming and passing along the wisdom and holding space. The genesis of that was still attached to, this is wrong and I want to make it right, which is incredibly egoic structure, incredibly arrogant. So I'm just sitting around sucking my thumb.
I guess another veil has fallen, you know, even though has been all this evolution, there's new doors to be taken down and new space to be created, I guess. And it's a great place where you're standing now of opportunity, no?
Yeah, it sounds like a member from the dining table has left and there's room for something much greater and grander to take the place.
Well, I was riding a scooter around here on Bali the other day, and we went up to a water temple and did a purification in the morning. And as we were driving up, there was an old man, hunched over, very thin, probably mid-80s at least. And I made eye contact with him as I walked by. and the simplicity, or the sophistication, I should say, of his simplicity, the ease of his existence in his body. He had nothing compared to what we have in the West. But the beauty of him standing in the morning light in his doorway, present with everything happening, just struck me so deeply and just showed me, gosh, that's wealth. And so how do I then attend to sharing the wealth? To be in humility, to be in the sobriety of the mind as it gets over its drunkenness, to work in my garden and enjoy the dirt that gets under my fingers, instead of living a life wearing rubber shoes all the time and living separate from Mother Earth, to recognize that the person yelling at me is just missing love and is letting me know in a very violent way. And so it's so humbling and so simple and yet difficult at times, because we think we have to do something.
Yeah, we just have to learn how to be again. Relearn.
And isn't it funny, because we're called human beings, but we spend all our time doing,
We're the human doings instead of human beings, I guess, lately.
Yeah, we just have to get off the treadmill, and it's harder in the density of a city when everybody else is on the treadmill. I find retreats as a place where you can go back and reconnect to nature. You can do visioning exercises. You can participate in shamanic practices for healing. You can sit with a fire. You can receive starlight transmissions. And that's the facilitation of a maestro, is just to hold that space and bring in the energy so that you can have the chance to reflect on what comes up for you, and then decide to set it down or to engage something else. A few weeks ago, we did a retreat here for 2 days, and as soon as we sat down in circle outside in this beautiful waterfall valley up north here in Bali, it just started pouring with rain. I mean, cats and dogs pouring with rain. It couldn't have rained any harder. And for the first 10 minutes, I just sat there and said, oh, we're getting a cleansing, right? But what I noticed is that several of the participants were incredibly uncomfortable with getting wet. And so we just sat there long enough until that passed. And then when that passed, we said, okay, let's go get in the river, fully closed. And then, okay, now that's passed and you're comfortable and you're getting a little cold. Let's go up to the waterfall, which is a screaming torrent now, and stand in front of that gale force wind. And let's just see how much comfort we can bring to our discomfort, shall we? And what was beautiful is the group came back to the spherical dome, Balinese beautiful space we were in. And we all proceeded to undress and dry ourselves off and put on dry clothes. And there was a peace and a tranquility as we sat in that circle that basically I realized nature had just sent everybody through a car wash several times. And then they were washed clear of everything that they came up the hill with. And there was a receptivity that we could speak to. It was beautiful, but they had to go through their dis-ease and their discomfort to find the comfort. And it was a delayed gratification.
It sounds like what we do in our retreats. We just get them into cold ice water, and we tell them they have to, until they're not smiling and really smiling, not faking the smile, we're not getting out of there. And you can see people. I think it's one of the most hard things we get our retreatees to do, but they end up loving it. And when it's about surrender. I think that's what the message you've been saying. Surrender. And once they surrender, there's no cold. There's just being. And then when we sit in a circle, they are there. There's no longer this or there's stories, because cold, as Wim Hof says, it's merciless, but it's love, and it's a ruthless teacher, but always with love.
Yeah, it's interesting because I find that the human program mind will go to, because it lives in duality, it's either cold or hot. It's either disconnected or connected. It's surrendering without realizing that surrender is a very active state. That I find that surrender is actually letting go of the limitation so that all that is can be present. And so I think we have a bit of work to do in that, to come back to that unity. And the interesting thing, like you talked about Drumbelow, the unity in the heart is, if we look at our toroidal fields, we have a masculine and a feminine, of a positive and a negative. And the only place in these dimensions where it overlaps is where it intersects and becomes unified in the small space of the heart. So the heart is the portal, and it's the space where both our masculine and our feminine come to reside. In the Andes, we talk about our yachai, our intuitive, intellectual intelligence, that marriage, and our creative fertility and our will, the yonkai in our belly, merging in our heart center into that unified state, the holy child, the mother, the father, the holy child. And so, yeah, we just, if you track down the cause of suffering, it's separation, in my opinion, in my experience. Yeah. But then what do we do if we don't have suffering? You know, we don't have to go shopping to buy anything to compensate. We don't have to get mad at anybody. Wow, oh, wow, that's love. Okay, great.
There's nothing to fix, right? Like what just happened to you, there's nothing to
fix. Yeah,
there's
nothing to fix. There's just that state where you go, aha, you know. And you know, another thing that I've gone through recently is actually the fear of love, the fear of dropping into love. Because if I drop into love and actually allow myself to be fully met, then there's nothing to resist. There's nothing to hold. It's all of that which actually causes the pain can disappear. It takes a lot of vulnerability, but okay. We discover the strength of vulnerability. You know, and that's called, to me, that's called receptivity.
Receptivity.
That allows the sunlight to germinate the seed, to grow from the garden, rich in the compost of our kaka. Yeah.
So would you say you've been, how long have you been doing retreats?
Since 2004.
2004. Would you say that people keep coming with the same, let's say, like pains and sores or their own stories, or you think we've been evolving as a whole and we're coming with like more finer details that we still have to get polished, maybe now go down more to the heart, or we still come with the same stories that you've been seeing since 2004?
There's a human condition, regardless of culture or geopolitics or economic strata. Cultures that are coming into financial stability tend to buy a lot. And then cultures that have bought everything have come to an awareness where that they're not satisfied and they choose something else. So depending on each individual, the degree of their consumerism, even the degree of their belief in trauma, their experience that they've come on, their ability to resolve, everybody shows up at whatever level they're at. But those who are repeating and continuing to go deeper and deeper, yeah, they are very much refining. The irony of that is that as what I find is as one walks along the path, you gain greater and greater tools, which means you have more capacity to do heavier, more difficult loads. So in the different pathways of holiness, once you've become healed in your own right, or adequately healed in your own right, then you start to do the lifting for others. You find that in the Andes and the Himalayas, take on the suffering of others. You don't take it on. You just hold space and attend to that. Now, the mystics will actually take on the karmic debt of different individuals that are reincarnating so that they can come forward in their current lifetime and not be delayed with the karma that was not completed in the last lifetime. So there's many, many aspects to this, but the point is that the better we get at this, the more work we do, the more we can show up collectively and hold space for humanity to rise. And it's like wearing a tool belt. Oh, I need a screwdriver. Dink. I need a hammer. Dink. And you use those techniques and those things that are what generate a spiritual intelligence. It is what's learned by in apprenticeship, the different ceremonies, the different prayers, the different things like that, so that it's not just a physical level, mechanical cleansing of the house. It's the difference between using a cleaner to wipe the windows clean and using sage to energetically cleanse the space. So we need to be aware that we need to cleanse things on all levels, within and around, and step up to the challenge that is presented by the strength of our capacity that is gained over time through the dedication of our own awakening. And then we take our place as a maestro, or not, or we just stand in that doorway like that 85-year-old man here in Bali to greet the morning sun, so that this Westerner, in the throes of his arrogance, riding to a water ceremony to cleanse, can have the opportunity to see the embodiment of contentment to what a Westerner would say is a very poor situation, where I saw him as being very rich in heart. And I had that moment to go, I don't need that much, you know? So it's the irony. You feel the irony, right? When we're brought up to attain, we're brought up to make life easier for ourselves. And in actuality, my responsibility is to address where I am suffering and causing others to suffer, and then become responsible for my perspective. So I stop engaging the fight or the war, so that I can move into the simplicity of that man in the doorway and be that without any intention, to be a tree in the forest amongst other trees, to turn my leaves up to the sunlight and do photosynthesis and bring that energy down into Mother Earth, so that can create the fire and the heat to compost. You know, that's what fire ceremony is.
Oh, wow.
It's a very simple and very profound, humble, sometimes challenging, oftentimes challenging state, and always happens at the most inconvenient times. We just don't have time for it, right? So there's our chance to choose what is most important. Am I going to bypass this moment to pray for the dead animal and lift it off the road and give it a proper burial at the side of the road and take on the responsibility of showing up late or missing my plane? Or am I going to ignore that thing of flight in order to make my flight? You know, those are just individual choices we have to make along the way, and there's no right or wrong. There's just the opportunity. But what I find is when I stop and assist the flight of the bird that has been killed by the car, I don't need the airplane any longer, because I'm learning how to fly myself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's just, life is ripe with paradox and irony. But I find that whenever we get to that paradox, that's when we're right in the intersection of love.
So beautiful. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
We have time for one more?
Yeah, we have time for a couple more questions.
Okay. I wanted to ask, this is something Jose and I were talking about the last few days, and it might be hard to word, but, you know, trying to wrap ourselves around this whole idea of our existence and, you know, multiple dimensions. The question is why? You know, it almost feels like we're in this big game, and like, what is the whole purpose of it? I mean, the word love comes up a lot. It's like, yes, to have that experience of love. Well, I would like to just hear what your perspective is.
Let me give some context, because we had a retreat guest that we had a shamanic ceremony with him, and he called us a week ago, and it's been already 3 months since his ceremony. And we're like, I get it. When I was in the ceremony, I was in that state of like unity state, and I understand that it's a vibration. It's a vibration, and then here we call it love, compassion, but in reality, that's a tag we're putting. In reality, it's just one thing. It's a vibration. And here we separate into boxes, whatever. But he was calling me desperate because like, but why do we have to go through all this suffering? Why are we born and we are born and we forget when we're born? And then why do we have to go through this process of remembering? Why this pain? Why not just stay in that vibration of everything?
How can you expand consciousness if you have nothing to expand from?
Mm-hmm.
Simple. If we come in as a soul in white light, constituted of 7 rays of the rainbow, and we go through experience and our photonic information that informs our DNA, or the information of the soul that is carried by the photons of light that informs our DNA, becomes blocked by our perception, by our mental and our emotional tension fields that are the result of incomplete experience or our ancestors' incomplete experiences. We close down our psyche gates or our Shen gates, and we prevent ourselves from receiving certain frequencies of light, which is a diminished state of consciousness, right? We have a perspective that says that experience I never want to experience again. Therefore, as we talked about earlier, I'm not able to actually come to resolution until I allow myself to rewrite that, right? And in doing so, I may suffer, I may be fearful, I may hurt, I may place blame until I have the wherewithal to overcome and choose love. So if I don't do that, then my perspective hijacks my energy and creates a karmic feedback loop that continually interrupts my stream of consciousness from the higher self, right? And continually blocks that stream of consciousness. So let's say I had the experience of a repressive figure in my life. Repression is about the will. Will is yellow spectrum. So somewhere in my yellow spectrum, I'm going to have a reactive response to yellow light, to repression. So in my system, I'm not going to have adequate information. So I am going to, as a soul, generate experiences where I can feel repressed so that I have the opportunity to overcome and open those gates and allow those frequencies back in. So I need the friction to make the fire. If I don't have adequate friction, I won't get the fire. If I have too much friction, I'm going to burn up. So I have to have adequate based on my soul's perception, the age of my soul, to recognize this hijacking that happens, right? And so when I allow that in, then that which was, I chose to repress me, and I'm magnetically attracted to me so that I have the opportunity to set myself free from repression, or based on my limbic brain, fight, flight, freeze, don't go there. You don't want to experience that because you remember last time, right? You were repressed, you were in pain, you were suffering. Don't do that. So it takes that courage to say, open the gates, let it in, let the experience happen, choose love, choose love, choose love, do the best we can. And then rewrite that synaptic pathway, rewrite, encode that yellow light with our personal experience. When we finish our lifetime, we take all that experience with us so that the white light that comes in becomes encoded by our experiential perceptual reality. And it becomes like encoded light squared. All that extra information, all that extra experience is in there. Now, if I'm going to find ease and I'm going to find comfort, I'm going to need the absence of that. If I'm going to find love, I'm going to need the absence of love, which is fear, right? In order to write that in, I'm going to need that blank page. So I'm going to put myself in an environment where there's no love so that I can learn love. I'm going to put myself in a very difficult environment so that I can find ease. Otherwise, the soul isn't evolving. We're just sitting around in a kind of an orgy state, just feeding ourselves all the time, avoiding it, right? So as we pass through this lifetime, we remember, we put the member parts, the DNA back together. And then that energy that passes on back to heaven, if you will, it actually comes and becomes in bodies, becomes the excess encoding that creates new universes, if you will. It becomes a spark of life itself. It is the expansion of the universe. And like the cell, when everything expands and gets to the golden mean of 1.618339 of itself, times 1.6, it gets to that size, boop, it doubles. Right? And it expands again. And those two, when it hits 1.618, the golden mean, it goes boop, and it doubles into 4. And then it goes to 8, and then it goes to 16, and then it goes to, and it's constantly expanding itself, just like the genesis that happens in the human embryo when the 12 sperm come around it, and then the 13th sperm impregnates it. And then life begins. But yet before life begins, we sit as a soul in the swing between the worlds, and we choose, oh, look at that parent combination. That'll be perfect because that one will repress me, and I want to learn about repression, and I want to overcome it this lifetime. And all the way up to 28 years, our undergraduate work, we go through, from what I've learned, everything that comes to us. And yet in those formative years, we learn to blame and run and get angry because we haven't been adequately raised with spiritual intelligence like in indigenous cultures. So we don't actually have the mechanism to see beyond the fallacy of what we think's going on, the illusion of what's really going on. We literally create these karmic feedback loops, you know? And the interesting thing scientifically that happens is if we have an experience and we don't come to a resolution, you know, as it travels around our meridian system, it takes 22 minutes and it goes through every meridian and it tries to find resolution. If it doesn't find resolution, it goes into the yuanchi or the short-term parking. And then every 28 days, it flushes into our system. I think we might have spoken about this last time we spoke, but it comes into our system. So the woman, when she menstruates, she's clearing her wall of her uterus in order to receive the egg, right? But she's also clearing 28 days of incomplete energetic feedback and storage. Everything in short-term parking gets flushed into the system, causing PMS, causing chaos, causing pain and suffering. Because a woman needs to be energetically pure, consciously pure, to be optimally fertile, to receive the soul. See, we've lost all this information in the West. We just try to push the menstruation away and take a pill so it's not painful, instead of recognizing that the cramps or the swollen breast or the difficulty or the altered states and the fuzz is actually our body saying, you know, you might be operating a little too fast and you might not be paying attention to what's going on. You may not be in contact with your menstrual cycle enough. And then us men, we don't have that indicator of blood that shows us that. We just kind of push on to provide and protect. And so we've kind of dumbed down that system in ourselves. So the extension of that is if we don't deal with that in the 28-day cycle, that information in our photon stream turns horizontal and freezes and writes into our DNA. And then when we actually do get pregnant, that DNA and all those things that are unresolved get passed to our children so that they can handle it for humanity, or maybe it'll be our grandchildren, and that's what I mean by all the ancestors, that they've had all this back there and it's all here, and we're the ones they've been waiting for, because we're the ones that are choosing truth over power. We're the ones that are recognizing, you know what, I need to deal with this. I'm tired of blaming. It's time that humanity grows up. It's time that we take responsibility. It's time that we choose love. To step beyond war and take responsibility that our light that we come in with is set up to be blocked so that we have the opportunity, the friction that we create, ho'oponopono, the perception of what's happening, to say, look at this opportunity as opposed to look at that I don't want. And then to take it in and work with it and to compost it and plant that in our garden and grow that life so that as we pass beyond this life and shed the mortal coil, we're able to actually release all that which sticks to us and rejoin collective consciousness with all that extra energy and power to expand so that the cells can double and we can create new universes. Co-creation.
Co-creation.
We're not just here having babies, writing books, making dinner. We're actively involved in the expansion of the universes. Because our every thought and our every action and intention affects everything everywhere. But yet all of that information has been lost. And that's the importance of the indigenous and what comes back together to fill the gaps in modern culture. We have a highly specialized, beautiful mind. What we need to do is bring in our highly specialized, beautiful heart. And then put it into the womb of creation and grow that garden from there. The place of work, the yonkai. So there's a lot of information around all this, but if we just have the information without the practical experience in the retreat, you know, how are you going to learn to swim if you don't get in the river, right?
And I guess that's what the Living Library is. So it was Bianca who found your website the first time, and she was like Wisdom Keepers. She was mind blown, because I think it's all that knowledge that, in a sense, we know that it's there, but you know, you've done that work of traveling the world and gathering information so then it can be applied and shared now with internet or with other mediums.
Yeah, right now we're doing the Living Library or the Wisdom Library, which is elders from all around the world to share their perspectives and their wisdom, and then have cross-references. So if we have 20 questions by 20 wisdom keepers, you have 400 answers to the same question. That's a lot of resource to draw from, not to follow them, but to disseminate what works best for you, and to create your own structure so that you can do your own ceremonies and bring forth the wisdom from your own land, you know? And I think it's time. And one of the, going back to Kabir's voice that I hear in my head right now, saying to me, how do we make sure that it isn't just spiritual consumerism? And when he asked me that question, I said, you know, it's a good question, but I don't think that's my responsibility. My responsibility is put a bunch of glasses of water out on the bar, and if people want to drink, they'll drink. And if they only consume in a spiritual consumerism, why? Because they've been trained to shop on Amazon all day long, then that's a beginning point. But I'm not going to judge any of it. I'm just going to devote my life to refilling the water glasses with the wisdom I find. You know, then there's nothing to be fixed.
There's nothing to be fixed, yeah.
All there is things to be nurtured, things to be watered, and all those seeds will grow in all of us. And then it's our responsibility as master gardener, in my opinion, you know, to weed that which no longer works, the old paradigms, the codependent relationships, the fear-based struggles, the reactionary, you know, thoughts, the blame, the arrogance, all that. And meanwhile, you know, you turn on the television or any media and they're just telling you to be in fear all the time. So one has to do the work to step out. You know, it's like...
So one of the first things to weed off probably is TV and things like that. So you don't get bombarded by this fear news agenda, I guess.
I think if one is unable to adequately formulate their own thinking, then you probably want to diminish the input to give yourself enough space. It's like meditation. Meditation, the first stage is to quiet the mind, but that's not the end result. The end result is to quiet the mind so you can tune into all the conversations that are going on. So tune out the fake news so that you can tune into the real news, the transmissions that are coming through. So you can hear the voice that says, you may just want to go over there and stand there for a moment. Well, why? But I can't. I'm late for this appointment. And then when you do take that time to stand there for a moment, this doorway opens and then this next reality shows up for you.
Synchronicity.
Synchronicity and receptivity, which
receptivity.
is reliant on vulnerability, which is reliant on courage, which is reliant on trust, which is reliant on finding your wings on the way down. You know, so that we can truly think different.
Bianca, do you have a last question?
I think just a big thank you. I mean, your words are so beautiful. My heart is really happy listening to your words. You're a poet at explaining these things. So thank you. I'm really excited to participate in one of your retreats one day.
Oh, I'd love to participate in one of yours.
And I'm excited what kind of retreat it will be now that you had this new insight of nothing to do. So it will be, maybe we're all just pouring glasses. Who knows?
I think so. Thank you both for what you do, your retreats, your invitation to come and speak. I just am deeply touched to have the conversation.
Yeah, and I'm excited to keep this conversation going. Before we finish, can you share what ways people listening to this or watching this video can reach out to you for your retreats or the Living Library or whatnot?
Yes, they can go to wisdomkeepersproject.org. And the Living Library is being edited right now, and it'll start showing up. There are also Wisdom Keepers YouTube channel that will be fed, and a couple of other large hubs that are under construction right now. So we're in the Genesis mode. The retreat page on the website shows the Peruvian retreats that we do, and those are immersive 9-day retreats. You go right into the heart of an eco-spiritual tradition, into a culture that has never been separate, that is completely animistic, that still talks to if they're not even unseen, they become seen and they're eternal. And then we do different retreats around the world. There's one in Slovenia later in the year. There's some in Bali, New Zealand. It's all there. It's formulating. It's actually going to become a hub where all this can come in, and it's a countertop with a lot of glasses of water on it.
Beautiful.
Awesome.
Yeah, let's keep in touch, and we'll definitely be excited to see what the audience has to say about this new episode. And yeah, I'm excited for the next time we chat. Lots of blessings. Thank you very much for joining and your time.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Take good care.